In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to chat with your own documents using OpenAI's GPT model. It's a really powerful feature. If you're not aware, the GPT database, the model itself, only has data up to September 2021. So if you want to add your own data or use a chat interface on a document or a website, you have to use embeddings, okay? And so I'm going to show you the architecture of our application, and then we'll get into the code and show you how to actually build it yourself. On the architecture side, we start off with some sort of source material. And here we're starting off with a PDF. And we then go through a process using LangChain and this tool called PyPDF Loader. And we split it into documents and chunks. The first step, it actually goes into a document, and one page of the PDF is equal to one document. And then you chunk that down further. You can have multiple chunks per document, or just equate it one-to-one there, depending on your chunk size. There are some tuning things that you can get into, but for the purposes of this conversation and this tutorial, I'm not going to get into that right now. So once we have our chunks, and these are just text chunks, we then send those text chunks to OpenAI and get our embeddings. And the embedding is essentially an array of numbers. So we go from text to an array of numbers. And these array of numbers are then used to find relevancy between them for certain queries. And this is part of the relevance search that happens when you make a query. So we have our embeddings from OpenAI, and then we need to store them somewhere. And we store them in a vector database called Pinecone. There are many vector databases out there. We're choosing Pinecone because it is a popular one and it's pretty easy to get up and get going. Okay, so we go from documents to embeddings, we store those in a database, and then we get to the part where a user wants to make a query. So when that happens, we fetch from Pinecone the relevant embeddings that the search thinks are relevant to that query. So this happens first, and then we take those embeddings and we send them to OpenAI in a call, and then OpenAI comes back with a text-based answer essentially. And that is our architecture. Next up, I will show you how to build this using Python. Before we get to the code, one more thing. You will need to create an account at pinecone.io, and then you should have an interface like this. You will need to create a project first, so create a project. I'm on the free tier, so I just have access to one project, so I can't create another one. So you create one here, and then in that project you have to create an index. And let's see, give the index a name and remember what it is. And then you have to use this certain number of, for the dimensions it has to be 1536. So name 1536, starter, and then create, and wait for it to finish, and then you can continue on with this tutorial. One more thing actually, you will also need an OpenAI API key. So if you don't have that, you can kind of go out to, you can go to OpenAI's website, create an account, and then get your key here. And once you have those two things, you can continue on with this. Okay, let's get to the coding part. So here's the project file, and I'm going to step through it piece by piece. So the first thing you'll need to do is install the Pinecone client and install LangChain. And from there we get a bunch of really cool utilities that we'll use throughout this project. The first thing we'll do is use PyPDF Loader to load our PDF. And you can see here in my project file, I have the PDF locally here. You can find a PDF online and use that. This one actually is a PDF about 8 questions or 8 things about LLMs. So I thought it was a very relevant document to use here. Okay, so we have our loader, and we load the PDF. We then perform the actual load, and we save that to the data variable. The next thing we do is we set up our text splitter, and so this is part of the LangChain library, and we specify a chunk size of 2,000 characters with an overlapper 0. These are things that you can tune as you go along. I'm just going to use these settings right now, but if you want to do this with your own data, you may want to work and play around with the chunk size. So we set up basically our text splitter and set the core settings here, and then we actually run the text splitter on our document, which is our data that we have right here. So we do that, and now we have this text object which has basically a bunch of chunks of our PDF document in it. The next thing we'll do is we'll set up OpenAI, and so we get our key, and so if you are doing this yourself, you have to basically make sure that this key is an environment variable with this name, and then we create the embeddings object here, and we pass in our OpenAI key, our OpenAI API key. And so these two things, this actually doesn't do much right now. This is just creating the object that we can use later on. Okay, so we have that set up, and then we set up Pinecone. You'll need your API key and then the environment. The environment is basically a path. It'll show in your index what the environment is. So make sure you grab that and add that there. Then we initialize Pinecone, and then we set our index name. Previously I showed you where to create the index, and you want to make sure that you have that index name here. And then we do this. We say Pinecone from text, and we do some list comprehension here that iterates over the text in our list, and we'll upload this to OpenAI to create our embeddings, and then we'll also save it to Pinecone. So this actually does a lot here. It's both communicating with OpenAI's embedding API to get the embeddings, and then it is uploading those to the vector database at Pinecone. So this is the loading of the data there. And then we go through it and we run the actual queries on our embeddings. So we set up, again, the OpenAI object, and we'll call this LLM. Then we load our chain here with this command so that we can start to run operations on our chain. Then we set up a query, so we'll say, what is this document about? And we do a search on our vector database. So what this step does is it goes out to our vector store and looks for a similarity of the text of this text right here, and pulls back the embeddings. And then we pass those embeddings to OpenAI to actually get our LLM response. And if that's confusing at all, you can go back to the beginning part of this tutorial where I walk through the architecture to see how that works again. Okay? So once all that is there and you've typed that in, you can just run it. So I'm just going to run python main.py, and this will go out, split our document into chunks, upload it to Pinecone, and then perform the query on our chain. Oh, and look at that. I have to set my environment variables. 1 second. Okay, I've done that. Oops, we'll have to cut that out. And then we run Python main again. And since we're waiting for that, and I've already showed you my keys, here they are right here. These are the export commands. Don't worry, I'll go ahead and delete them after this tutorial. Okay, great. So here it is. We have our response. And remember, our question was, what is this document about? And here is the response to that. So that's the initial setup. And of course, you can create additional functions that would just query this. So this is actually doing the whole setup, but if you wanted to have, let's say, a function that just ran queries, then you'd want to just pull in these last bits to run those queries. And that's all. That's how you perform embeddings. Thanks a lot. If you like this video, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the future.